He who controls the past commands the future. He who commands the future conquers the past.
Hey everyone, thought I would do a little video on my thoughts and some personal takes on the current state of the Command & Conquer franchise, and explore the likeliness of different avenues it could take in the future. Does CNC truly live in death, or is there still hope for the franchise?
In the name of Cain! Cain lives!
But before we go forward, let's just rewind the tape a little bit. 2020 saw the release of CNC the Remastered collection, which included remastered versions of CNC 1 and Red Alert 1. It was received very well both by fans and critics, with the consensus being it's one of the best remasters out there. But we actually have another CNC product that wasn't received very well that had a hand in its existence. This being the mobile game CNC Rivals, whose announcement, not so surprisingly, pretty much went like this.
This is gonna sound morbid, but I am so glad my husband is not here to see this. It would destroy him to see CNC go this way.
Alright, don't you... That's... Oh my god, that's totally... Oh my god, it's Command & Conquer. Oh god.
But a couple months later, Jim Vasella, a producer at EA, went on the CNC subreddit and made the following announcement. Let's just zoom in on this part. As most of you may know, we recently announced Command & Conquer Rivals, a mobile game set in the Command & Conquer universe. Following the reveal of Rivals, we heard you loud and clear. The Command & Conquer community also wants to see the franchise return to PC. And as a fan of CNC for over 20 years, I couldn't agree more. With that in mind, we've been exploring some exciting ideas regarding remastering the classic PC games, and already have the ball rolling on our first effort to celebrate the upcoming 25th year anniversary. Man, that was an exciting day for CNC fans. But yeah, it seems like the Remastered collection was more or less a PR move to save some face after the Rivals disaster. But then, fast forwarding a couple of years to 2023, it seems EA didn't learn from their previous mistake as another mobile game was announced in the form of CNC Legions. I'm willing to admit Rivals was, decent in its own right, strictly in the context of a mobile game. The problem is nobody wants a cheap mobile game in the first place from a franchise that is predominantly PC-centric. Remember this?
Is there any plans to make this playable on PC, or is this just strictly mobile forever?
Are there any? The current plan is to be on mobile, both Android and iOS. We don't have any plans at the moment to do PC. Do you guys not have phones?
Yeah, you guys all have phones.
Yep, that went over well. It's kind of like having asked for a puppy for years, but instead you get a Tamagotchi. Fun for maybe like 5 minutes, but then you just kinda go meh and forget it ever existed. But while Rivals actually made a relatively competent attempt of turning CNC gameplay into a different format, Legions was just nothing more than a completely soulless and irredeemable cash grab. To go back to the Tamagotchi comparison, this one would have been made out of cardboard. If you want a good example of how to present a mobile game, check out Bethesda's E3 presentation from 2015. They began by announcing a mainline game with Fallout 4, and then proceeding to shadow drop the mobile game Fallout Shelter. Like, here's something for you to play while waiting for the main game to release. Which, oh by the way, just in a couple of months. Actually, just go watch their entire presentation. It's really a great example of how to build up hype. But I digress. Unfortunately, we didn't get a remaster out of the backlash out of Legion. But in March 2024, we did get some more unrelated good news, with CNC The Ultimate Collection being available on Steam. And then almost a year later, February 2025, we were hit with a real banger with the release of the source codes for CNC 1, Red Alert 1, Renegade, and Generals, as well as Steam Workshop integration for Renegade, Generals, Tiberium Wars, Red Alert 3, and that one. And this is where we are today. So looking towards the future, let's examine the different avenues the franchise could take.
I've seen the future. Our Tiberian future.
So probably the number one request from fans is official remasters of Tiberian Sun as well as Red Alert 2. The problem is it's pretty much up in the air whether the actual source code for these games still exists, potentially further evidenced by their absence, leaving a suspicious gap from the recent source code release. And without the source code, remasters of these would be extremely difficult to pull off, if not impossible. Would be nice with an official word on this, one way or the other. People do seem to cling to some specific wording by Jim Vesela when he in the announcement post for the Ultimate Collection being on Steam said the words, after the launch of the first CNC Remastered collection. But I wouldn't really put any stock in that it was any sort of hint towards another Remastered collection being on the way. I'm sure it was just completely unintentional by Jim for it to be interpreted that way. It would be pretty heartbreaking if the source codes for these games were forever lost. Though I do have to say that visually these games have probably aged the best out of all the CNC games. There's just something so clean and timeless about these old school graphics that doesn't necessarily transfer over to fully 3D in the same way. But maybe it's just the nostalgia talking. But I think Tiberian Sun in particular, with its emphasis on atmosphere, environment and lighting, would benefit the most from a facelift and would look absolutely incredible with modern graphics. While it made sense to remaster CNC1 and Red Alert 1 simultaneously due to their many shared assets and code, it might be a better idea here to focus on remastering one game at a time, given how these games are more divergent and complex in their design. As for other potential remasters, I think we can pretty much count out Renegade and Generals given how the source codes for these are now in the public domain and the community can essentially remaster them themselves. The other Sage games, namely CNC3 and Red Alert 3, could do with a new coat of paint as well, especially seeing as how the Sage engine is locked to 30 FPS due to how the game logic and animations is tied to the frame rate. These games still have an active player base to this day, so it definitely would make a lot of sense to give them the old remastered treatment. Something they could do for CNC3 in particular is to rebalance the vanilla campaigns, since the balancing patches that were intended for multiplayer affected the single player campaigns as well, and made them much harder than they should be. This was however not a problem for the campaign in the game's Wrath expansion. I'm not a big multiplayer guy myself, but native online support without the need for any third-party applications would of course be really convenient as well. Okay, so moving on. So what about an official sequel? Well, unfortunately, RTS has become a pretty niche genre, which in and of itself translates to a profit risk factor for companies like EA that look to play it safe and maximize return on investment more than anything else. Just looking at their previous release catalog 2020 onwards, it's like 90% sports games and The Sims. Yeah, not really living up to that name there, Electronic Arts. There's also the monetization factor to consider, and RTS games doesn't necessarily lend themselves to an easily implemented monetization model when it comes to things like microtransactions, etc. And hey, I'm not saying microtransactions is good or anything, it just kind of seems like a prerequisite for big budget games these days, so yeah. Let's for the sake of argument ignore all that for a moment and theorize the possibility of a sequel on its own merit. Let's start with the Tiberium universe. Well, the thing here is, you'd have to acknowledge the elephant in the room one way or the other. I think you know what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's pretty safe to say what fans think of the canonicity of CNC4.
Never existed.
So officially retconning the hell out of that one is probably what everyone would prefer. So the choice here would be to make a CNC4 that fans will actually enjoy, right? This time actually acknowledging the ominous cliffhanger with a Scream coming back with a full invasion force and everything. Maybe even partly taking the battle to space and GDI becoming like the Galactic Defense Initiative instead. Could be pretty epic. But while a true sequel to Tiberium Wars is obviously something that will be really exciting for us CNC fans, it might be a hard sell for the executives at EA to greenlight. An official retcon is not a choice that would be taken lightly, as it would be an admission of a major misstep and highlight a lack of confidence in a previous product. Which of course you could not blame them for, but could potentially raise some skepticism and confusion from potential buyers. So yeah, there definitely would be some major marketing challenges, which alone might be enough for EA to nope out of this option. Option B would of course be to just swallow the proverbial pill and make a CNC5 where Tiberium Twilight is actually canon. This would surely upset a lot of fans, but if it means we get a good mainline CNC again, maybe it's a worthy compromise. But is the train wreck that CNC4 left behind even salvageable to spin into a new storyline that would actually work on multiple game design levels? Perhaps a big time skip would solve a lot of issues. With none no longer being a threat, GDI would have decommissioned their crawlers and gone back to their tried and true base building we all know and love. But of course it's not really a Tiberium game without Nod, or well, Tiberium, so you need to find a way to bring them back somehow. And then what kind of technology would Nod even have by now? I mean, are they even human anymore? Or have they like merged with Tiberium or something? Pretty much anything could have happened to them after they went into that screen portal. There are enough variables to account for here to make your head spin. But to just answer the question, could a Tiberium Twilight sequel actually work? I mean, never say never, but there's a lot of things that would have to get just right. And I'm pretty doubtful EA would even consider opening this giant can of worms just right out of the blue. It would almost be like walking blindfolded onto a minefield. So what about a new Red Alert instead? While the whole time traveling shenanigans gives him more potential to stand on his own and be less encumbered by decades of backlore. But Red Alert being kind of the oddball of the franchise, I don't necessarily see it as the best choice for a grand revival of the franchise. Also, war game with evil Russians might be something they would want to stay clear from given what's unfortunately going on in the world right now. Although I will say if they ever decide to make a new Red Alert in the future that they tone down the craziness and go back to the more darker tone of the original. That leaves us with Generals 2, which is something they actually tried in the past, but it ended up on the scrap heap for various reasons. Development hell, corporate greed, the works. Next to Red Alert 2, General 0 Hour is the most played CNC on Steam, so it would make sense to make another go at a sequel in that respect. I'm just pretty doubtful how much of the game's political incorrectness would fly in this day and age. It's also arguably the least iconic of the three universes and very mechanically different from traditional Command & Conquer gameplay, and more in line with games like StarCraft. StarCraft actually have a section on its Wikipedia page talking about its cultural impact, which is really saying something. So if they would want to appeal to a larger crowd, maybe that type of gameplay is the way to go. But on the other hand, it would probably disappoint the majority of CNC fans. Maybe we're just gonna have to face the facts that a new CNC RTS is just not gonna happen due to all the previously mentioned circumstances and modern gaming culture in general. And if anything, the franchise will just have to go off genre to even have a chance to thrive. Sort of like what happened with Fallout. I guess they could go for some sort of multiplayer shooter like a crossover with Battlefield. Battlefield 4 did actually have a mode that is slightly reminiscent of Command & Conquer gameplay, which was called Commander Mode, and it basically puts one player with a bird's eye view of the entire map giving orders to squads, deploy various support powers and things like that. Seems like a natural thing to bring back should there ever be like a CNC/Battlefield tie-in. They could even include things like allocating funds for vehicle and base construction to really drive home the CNC aspect to it. Maybe I lack imagination, but I don't really see much else working for the CNC IP. If anything, maybe like some sort of open world-esque MMO type game like the cancelled Continuum game, but I really don't see that happening. Or hell, I don't know, a CNC kart racing game? Wait, that would actually be kind of fun. But I think I can speak for a lot of people when I say that anything short of a return to classic CNC RTS form would not really be a true return of Command & Conquer. Although at this point I believe a new mainline entry could really benefit from a clean slate by essentially rebooting the entire franchise. And what better way to do that than go back to the very roots by making a full-on remake of the very first game, Tiberian Dawn, with essentially the same story but with modern gameplay elements. This way you would avoid all the headache of how to approach an actual sequel. New players will have a natural starting point in the franchise and existing fans will get a brand new CNC. Everybody wins. It would be a perfect opportunity now with the approaching 30-year anniversary of the game that started it all, and a worthy celebration of the franchise as a whole. I'm not gonna go too much into the potential gameplay mechanics for this theoretical remake, but something I'll touch on that I would personally really like is if they fleshed out the campaigns and added more replayability, which I think as a department CNC games in general have been kinda lacking in. Because even though the missions themselves are more often than not really great, the campaigns in CNC games are relatively short-lived and one and done. You might go back to them every few years, but you kinda know what to expect. Some expansions added some extra solo game modes, namely the General's Challenge in General 0 Hour, Global Conquest mode in Kane's Wrath, and the Commander's Challenge in Red Alert 3 Uprising. Looking at the Global Conquest mode in particular, perhaps some elements of that could be incorporated into the campaign mode itself. Like maybe GDI needing to manage city unrest to ensure a good public opinion which would directly tie into your funding. And conversely with Nod, you could have abilities to engage in false flag operations and spread propaganda and things like that. Also, instead of just having the choice of Mission A or Mission B like in the original, choosing where to expand your military presence would have tactical value. Perhaps inspiration could be taken from games like XCOM, which takes a less linear approach in its campaigns. things like procedurally generated side missions with random modifiers and rewards, but also various progression systems like being in command of a home base and maintaining your various assets, building facilities and choosing what to research in order to upgrade technology, or sending teams and ops to get intel and leads on enemy facilities. All those things made each XCOM campaign feel more distinct and added a lot of replay value because the stakes would constantly vary. So yeah, perhaps some of those ideas could be applied to modern AAA Command & Conquer. In any case, it would just be interesting to have something more to do in between missions. On the multiplayer side, why not bring back something like the World Domination Tour from Tiberian Sun and Red Alert 2? Each player chooses either GDI or not and help their respective faction fight for the controlled regions around the world, until one side is declared the winner and the conquest begins anew. But yeah, for a franchise that has more or less been packed up in a crate to gather dust in some archive, these are perhaps all very over-ambitious ideas. But since EA does not seem to have the conviction or balls to do anything with the franchise, maybe it's time for the IP to switch hands. Of course, EA selling the rights to CNC is maybe even more unlikely than them actually making a new proper game. But if the rights should go to someone else, who should it be? Well, the company that first springs to my mind is Microsoft. Microsoft not only owns the Age of Empires franchise, but now with the acquisition of Activision Blizzard, they also own the Warcraft and Starcraft IPs. So let's take a look at how these franchises have been holding up. Most recently, in November 2024, Warcraft 1 and 2 got official remasters, as well as an updated version for Warcraft 3 Reforged. And back in 2017, Starcraft Remastered came out. StarCraft 2 hasn't gotten a remaster of its own, I guess it doesn't really need one, but it is getting some relatively constant patches. But Age of Empires fans have been eating especially well with not only remasters of every game in the franchise, technically 2 for Age of Empires 2, but also an official sequel in Age of Empires 4 which was released for both PC and Xbox. But not only this, new content has been released for both AoE 2 and 3, with the most recent DLC being released May 6, 2025 for AoE 2. On the same day, the game was also released for PlayStation 5, having been previously ported to Xbox in 2023. To put some of this in context, Age of Empires 2 was released way back in 1999. This was also the same year that Tiberian Sun was released. So imagine not just having Tiberian Sun remastered, but also getting new official expansion packs following Firestorm, while also having the game ported to consoles.
Oh, a man can dream, though. A man can dream.
Things might have been very different since there was a time when Microsoft was really close to buying Westwood Studios, as Ed Fries, former vice president of game publishing at Microsoft, tells on the Xbox Era podcast. He was putting together a deal to acquire Westwood before going on his honeymoon, but once he returned, EA had managed to step in and buy Westwood instead. Maybe someone should build a time machine and make that deal happen. But of course there's no guarantee that CNC would have fared better under Microsoft. They do have their fair share of controversies. Gotta say I'm pretty salty about them recently cancelling the Perfect Dark reboot. That one kinda stinks. One interesting tidbit is that one of the directors for all the recent Age of Empires releases is none other than Adam Miscreen, whose name should be very familiar to CNC fans as Adam was deeply involved in all the CNC games from 1996 to 2003. Adam would be an obvious choice to spearhead the design of the next Command & Conquer should Microsoft acquire the rights. Which again, not bloody likely. But hey, maybe they will just outright buy the entire freaking company. For what it's worth, it would have been quite interesting to see essentially all the RTS giants under one banner. In conclusion, I have to say I'm not too optimistic about CNC's future. From EA's perspective, I can see there being too many risks with too little reward for them to do anything substantial with the franchise. It's anything but straightforward which of the many choices to take that would actually guarantee profitability while also not pissing off fans. If nothing else, at least we have Tempest Rising, which is probably as close as you can get to CNC without copyright infringement. With some hope, it could help to reignite the RTS flame and inspire other studios to breathe some new life into the genre. But what the future might hold is of course wholly uncertain. But what do you think? Will we ever see a grand return of Command & Conquer at all? And if so, in what shape or form? Or does CNC truly live in death? Maybe Einstein said it best.
Time will tell. Sooner or later, time will tell.